Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princeton alumni. Our podcast talks about real issues for real Black communities. So Ray, you know, spring is coming, and I tried to go out and get some gardening supplies, but since COVID, so many people have taken up gardening that it's become difficult to actually get a flower pot.
Well, I mean, Terry used to do that all the time where, especially when we had the house. I mean, we bought big pounds of bags of the miracle soil, right? Miracle Grow soil. And I had that stuff all over the house. I couldn't have enough of it, you know, because she was planting things everywhere. We had planters in the front of the house, back of the house. We had mint. We had all time. She was growing everything.
Yeah, so it's hard to get that now because so many people have picked up gardening, which is good because I guess they discovered when we were in quarantine and sometimes food wasn't available that it would be a good pastime to start gardening.
Well, and you know, our guest today, Michelle, doesn't just use gardening as a pastime, he uses it as a teaching tool. So we'd like to welcome today Hans Hageman, who is the executive director of Land to Learn, which was formerly Hudson Valley Seed, a nonprofit program growing a movement for food justice and community wellness through garden-based education. The Land to Learn staff are garden educators who teach children in school gardens, empowering students during the school day through curriculum-integrated lessons focused on healthy eating, food literacy, outdoor learning, and academic success. They reach more than 5,000 students from kindergarten to second grade in elementary schools located in the towns of Newburgh, Beacon, Kingston, and Garrison, which are all located in the Hudson Valley region, which is where I live, actually. Hans is a Princeton University grad of 1980, has his law degree from Columbia University. And Michelle, he is so committed to this region. He's a volunteer firefighter, he's a fitness trainer, and the guy even does blacksmithing in his spare time.
That's pretty impressive.
And we'd like to welcome Hans Hageman to the show. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, so Michelle and I are really interested in the Land to Learn program. Tell us a little bit about it and how you got involved with it.
The program has been around for, I guess, going on close to 7 years now. My involvement is about 2.5 years as executive director. And we do garden-based instruction that hopefully provides wellness and lessons in nature and food to mainly elementary schools, but we've also worked in security institutions, and we're increasingly working with young people, teens in residential centers around issues of food justice, wellness, and agriculture.
And in the creation of the program, did you actually have input in terms of how it was going to be formulated? I mean, like, did you work on the techniques? Did you work on the ideas and everything? Or was that something that was laid down from before and then you just kind of added to it?
When I got there, the program specifically worked in 11 elementary schools, and that was the extent of the programming, where the kids would be given classroom lessons and then be taken outside to gardens that our garden educators had established so they could actually do the hands-on learning. When I got there, it seemed to me that we needed to expand the mission, because once kids K through 2 get all these lessons, unfortunately, the way our education system works, most of those lessons get lost, and particularly at a time when they're most needed. So that's why I've done my best to expand out into areas of middle school and carceral institution and those residential centers that I mentioned. And the staff there has been incredibly flexible in terms of pushing their thinking and understanding in terms of what we need in the communities that we work in.
You know, I'm always interested in the carceral part of it because of the population that I work with and the issues that I write about. So can you give us a little idea about how that opportunity to expand into that population happened?
It was actually kind of a word of mouth. I had one of my colleagues said that she had an acquaintance who worked at this secure center, and it's a secure center that houses boys who've been convicted in adult court of particularly violent crimes. And she said they were having trouble finding anybody to begin a gardening program, which was something that the institution felt it needed, to their credit. And so would I be interested? And I, something I hadn't really thought about, but I said, sure, I'll take a look. And it didn't take much looking or thinking, just based on how I've lived my life and how I grew up. And I immediately said, yeah, let's do this. And then I entered into the bureaucracy of doing paperwork and coming up with a really fast lesson plan and curriculum, and had to. I soon realized that doing things like bringing metal gardening spades or hose and shovels and things like that were going to be problematic in an institution where
Needless to
everything
say.
is monitored. Now,
Just a
understandably,
little.
but it really got my mind thinking in a lot. I got to be creative in terms of how to figure out how to get these implements in, which I really needed. Tomato stakes. How do you do that? But eventually, through the many months there, the staff and the director there trusted me that I could handle whatever was coming through. The boys were just happy to be outside, and there were still some questionable things, like some of the kids wanted me to. They claimed it was their love of spicy foods and what I would call umami or whatever, but could I bring in hot peppers? And so that was another big back and forth. I got a couple in, but that was an interesting challenge.
Well, I mean, brothers have to make Tabasco sauce up. Come
Exactly,
on now.
and ideally put it on their food, right? But
Exactly.
But I had one young man from Honduras who really did, want to add that to the cuisine, and one of them, in fact, got so excited once some of the peppers grew that he just pulled one off and started eating it, and it was understandably incredibly hot. And I felt bad for laughing at him, so I grabbed one myself and ate it, and everything was fine after that.
When our kids get in trouble, so many people are willing to just dispose of them, toss them off as not salvageable or not worthy of much more attention. So what did you see in the kids after you started introducing this idea that they could help produce plant life or grow something with their own hands? What kind of impact did that have on them?
Well, for me, just growing up and knowing people that I've known, and knowing that for most of us, none of us would want to be caught on our worst day, and that for some of these kids, that's kind of what got them on their path. Keeping that in mind, my goal is for my own kids, myself, is to figure out my life purpose and to be useful to whatever community I'm a part of. And that these young men were going to be outside in a community one day. And how do you make them useful? And I know in the world that we grow up in, and the schools that I've been associated with and have applied to jobs for and things like that, that meritocracy and credentials are important. And only after something like a pandemic shows up do people then say, well, no, you know what? We have to consider people who work with their hands, people who can work with compassion, people who can be healers. And the lens that I looked at these boys through was one where they could be healers, where they could be producers, where they could be useful to whatever communities they ended up with, in no matter when they were released into those communities, because the alternative was not going to be acceptable to society or for these boys.
So Hans, I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. We're both interested in trying to figure out how you were able to adapt your program from a hands-on one to a virtual one. That's the first question. And then on your website, you list 4 examples of why garden learning is so important for young students. I'd like you to elaborate on each one of them, if you could.
Right. When the pandemic hit, I try to stay on top of things like this. It's just kind of how my brain works. And I knew immediately we would have to move to remote lessons. And we moved even faster than the school districts we worked in many respects, to finding online platforms, to figuring out how we would produce and edit these videos. I wrote letters to people saying, this is what's going on. Can you give us a discount or a break on your digital products to make that happen? And actually, some of these companies were very forthcoming in terms of video storage, video editing, and so forth. So then it was up to the educators that I work with to put those lessons together. And they are passionate. I mean, they're zealous in their love for gardening and working with young kids. So they after getting over the disappointment of not being in the dirt with the kids, working with their hands, they adapted. And so part of it was getting those lessons up fairly quickly. But then also part of it is the organization became a seed hub, and we put together gardening kits for people to, whether in certain communities, whether it was a backyard or in some cases, whether it was a windowsill, getting them to grow any kind of vegetable so that there was some sense of agency, some sense of being in control of something. So even if it was a tomato plant, that they would be able to do that in an apartment or in a backyard. And that went over very well. We're continuing now. We're probably going to be opening up a reading and learning circle in the different communities we work with my preference being to focus on Octavia Butler's Parable of the Talent and Parable of the Sower. So those are some of the things. It's constantly adjusting, trying to get feedback from the community as to what they're going to need, what they want. One of the big things that I wasn't able to do, and again, it's bureaucracy, and I get it, was was doing what other places around the world were doing, which was opening up green spaces and continuing lessons in those green spaces without much interruption. We weren't able to do that, and I understand that, but it's something that we may have to look at going forward. One of the things that we try to do is create a sense of environmental stewardship amongst our students. And there were a couple of things that kind of surprised me, coming from Harlem up to this rural space that I live in, and then working in some of these other places in the mid-Hudson Valley. Frankly, how white a lot of the quote food space is, but even more so in the environmental justice space in terms of recognition. I don't necessarily mean the people working in those spaces, but in terms of the recognition in those spaces. And the environment is one that particularly stood out. So one of our missions, one of our goals is to create environmental stewards amongst our kids. So learning to love the earth under their hands and working with that sense of biophilia, that innate sense that we have this connection to nature, is something that we try to nurture and grow, because in too many communities that are otherwise devastated by industry and other societal shocks that mainly fall on Black and brown and poor communities, is the unavailability of natural space and an inability to commune with those spaces, both for one's own soul, but also for a larger type of healing and care of the larger earth. So that's one of the things we kind of instill. And so, for instance, we have one intern who worked with us and now in college, she's very science and math focused, and she attributes a lot of that to having worked with us as an intern, and now is looking at environmental justice as a career that she's going to pursue. And we're going to try to do more of that.
That's
then,
great.
Then there are, and we're thrilled, and that's scaling that up is part of the plan. In terms of, and Michelle, you had talked about some of the carceral institutions. One of my goals is to examine, because it's not clear to me, and I have a whole handbook talking about food in prisons and how you're supposed to prepare it and all that other stuff that I have to go through. But one of the things I'm trying to find out is how much of that food is grown locally, how much is and whether it's a school, and interestingly, whether it's a school or a prison, the economy says that you need to buy the cheapest commodity generally. Now, what people don't look at are the downstream costs of saving dollars. And so one of my goals will be both increasing in the schools, but also for the institutions that we're working in, is making sure that we can get higher allocations of money spent on locally grown food, and ultimately, eventually, from Black and brown farmers. And so that's part of the goal. I'm going to have interns working on that because I don't have the brain to figure that legislative advocacy piece out. But it's there, and it's available. And so in some communities, it's talking about what are sometimes called food deserts, but what Karen Washington calls food apartheid, because she rejects the idea of a food desert, saying a desert is a natural phenomenon. Apartheid is something that's been imposed on people. And so you look and see the number of liquor stores in a community versus stores that are selling wholesome food. Right. And food also that's culturally appropriate and relevant. So those are some of the immediate issues that we'd like to take on. I have a big project around education, empowered students, and oppression that again, I want to base on Octavia Butler's books, because if you look at Octavia Butler, one of the things that you learn from her books, and for me as a person of color, prepping was always something that I kind of had to keep in the closet, but I'm a closet prepper. And so where are my people prepping? Why are all these other people prepping? I mean, you look at, people will talk about climate dystopia and all these other things, but there are only certain people preparing for it. Why is that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you read, and when I first read Octavia Butler's books, I was surprised pleasantly to find that the protagonist, Lauren Olamina, talks about to her best friend, that to her Joe, that she should read 3 books on survival in the wilderness, 3 on guns and shooting, 2 each on handling medical emergencies, California native and naturalized plants and their usage, and basic living, log cabin building, livestock raising, plant cultivation, soap making. And so for me, reading that, my dream is to create a program or even a school, because don't get me started on unschooling, is to create a school with a curriculum centered around those things in those novels. And so that's another thing. Another piece I'm going to push is a program that I know I'm going to get pushback on, but it's going to be called Build a Better Man. And that has to do with the young boys that I work with and have worked with for a lot of my professional career, who can't find their place. And when they don't, frankly, embrace their sacred feminine as an archetype, not as a gender distinction, but also don't know what it means to be, quote, manly, that they do indeed have a role in being a protector, that they indeed do have a role about being aggressive, but aggressive in the pursuit of justice, creating a program around that. So those are just some of the big plans. And my kids say, you got a lot of big ideas. And I'm like, how many of them haven't I pulled off when I really, have focused? So we'll see.
Love that, because one of the things that's happening now is the younger people are demanding that the older ones think outside of the box, right?
Yes.
So the idea that there should be a curriculum developed around survival is fascinating to me, and I love it. And Octavia Butler is certainly one of my favorite sci-fi authors. So but that leads me to the question. You said your kids are asking you. You got a lot of plans. How is your staff responding to your effort to push them to think outside of the box?
Well, I have 2 kind of personas that I have kind of adopted. And once I got past 60, I said, okay, I'm going to embrace being a grumpy old man, but I'm also going to embrace being an elder. And so I'll pull one of those 2 out depending on the audience, right? And so for my staff, if they're very progressive thinking. So if I say you need to view me as an elder, they kind of then back off and say, all right, and they look at it. To their credit, they take a deep breath, and they, as uncomfortable as they may be with some of the ideas, they embrace it in that context, and it's out of respect, and I appreciate that. And their attitude now, and so for me, I once ran an organization with 350 employees. I've got 9 now, right? And when I had 350 employees, there had to be a hierarchy. There had to be decisions made from a very hierarchical kind of point of view. With the staff that I have now, I haven't had to do that. I don't want to do that. They don't want me to do that. So they've trusted me that in terms of my leadership, I'm more of a coach and a mentor. And I'm someone who I like to believe ensures their own growth as educators and as people. And because they trust me with that, they're willing to work with these ideas and say, all right, let's see where this old man is going with this one. We'll play along for now. So,
well, so Hans, so now let's say you've instituted your program at a particular school, and I think that you guys are involved in a lot of the schools in the Hudson Valley area, right? How do you quantify the progress that you make with these students once you begin to introduce them to your farming curriculum, for lack of a better way of putting it?
A lot of it, and particularly because of the age of the students we're working with, it's hard to get a lot of really scientific quantitative measures. A lot of it is objective. A lot of it is based on survey and feedback, not just from the kids, but also from the kids' parents and families and the teachers, the classroom teachers. So, and we had, I don't want to get it wrong, but I think we had a team from SUNY New Paltz actually recently come in, and do an analysis of the programs, and we're all still going through the data, but it looks impressive to me as a non-data person, what they did, both in terms of the objective feedback, but also in terms of the classroom before and after, in terms of kids' knowledge and awareness of certain good health practices, in terms of certain nature concepts, in terms of classroom behavior, in terms of classroom performance academically, pre our program and post. And so we're still trying to move some of those through. Right. When I was at the Secure Center, I got to, and we were just at the point where I was going to hit some statistics on the young men who had been, because it was a challenging place to work in, but I was working on getting staff to do some of their own reporting, but also finding out how much of the food that we grew in the garden was being consumed in the cafeteria, those kinds of things. But COVID kind of blew that up. So we're constantly looking at ways where we can, in fact, figure out some of the better measures. We'll be able to do a better job of that once we move into the middle school and high school levels.
You know, you mentioned parents before, parents of the students, and something that was interesting when I used to tutor kids back when I was in high school and college. Sometimes it would be very difficult to get the parents more involved with whatever the children were learning in that tutorial program that we were working in, and just convincing them of their need to be a part of the children's, work after school and what have you. How have the parents reacted, when a kid brings a box of dirt home, with almost nothing in it and a bag of seeds or what have you? How involved do the parents get, and how much are they involved in the wellness aspect of your program?
The parents are, for the most part, very receptive to the education piece, or when the kids bring home that box of dirt. And depending on if those parents are recently arrived immigrants, they're thrilled and didn't realize that actually this kind of thing existed in the American schools, right? So for that population, they're excited. They also get, and without us really having to explain, that it's an opportunity for them, particularly if you have more than one generation in a household, for them to connect through growing, for them to connect through eating, for them to provide feedback on these are the kind of vegetables where we grew up down south or overseas or whatever. So it's an even better opportunity than any of the traditional curricular subjects to open up a discussion between the kids and the parents, or kids' parents and grandparents. And tell me this, remind me the second part of that question.
Oh, no, it was just about, you in your program, you talk about wellness and diet for the students that you're working with, and that yes. If they eat better food, they will have better outcomes, and and convincing the parents that maybe some of the meals that they were preparing before, well, hey, let's put some more of this homegrown food, homegrown vegetables or produce or whatever into our diet so that we can eat healthier.
And that's a continuing work in progress. Again, pre-pandemic, one of the plans that we had was to work with some of the teens that we work with and have them produce and present community meals, and getting feedback from families in the community as to what they'd like to see on the menu, then eventually soliciting their help to help also prepare these meals and talking around those meals. And we were going to we started conversations with some of the local eating establishments to say, what's your slowest night? Can you make this available? But again, those plans got derailed. I'm really hoping we can get those back on track.
So one of the things I saw about the whole COVID aspect related to gardening is that because of COVID, people have taken up gardening at some kind of record level, right? The whole idea of being quarantined and not being able to buy groceries has finally convinced people that we do need to know something more about where our food comes from. So I'm guessing that'll be good for you.
Well, I'm hoping, because thank you for bringing that up, Michelle, because one of the other things that I got that when you talk about getting staff to think about ways of doing things, we're caught up, like all nonprofits, in the philanthropy industrial complex, and some wonderful people working in there, but I also want to free my organization up to a certain extent. So one of the things I was urging my staff to do was come up with a membership program. And we wouldn't have to limit it to the Hudson Valley. We would make it national. And we could even then have a buy one membership, donate another membership to a family who can't afford it. It's at a price point of like $15 a month, but there are lessons, there are PDFs, there are weekly live calls to troubleshoot or to brainstorm or to hot seat people who are having gardening issues. And it's particularly done in the context of homeschooling and saying this is an opportunity for the whole family to learn how to grow, to learn how to garden, and it'll keep your kids from falling behind in the STEM subjects if you focus on this whole plan. Because we align on, and again, we could do even more, but we align all of our curricula in terms of national and state standards. So, and that's at the very least that we can do. So we have that membership option. And again, my staff has done a great job. I'm the one that says, look, this is the digital platform that you should use. These are the marketing words you should use. I'm going to do the Google ads and all that stuff. So that's just started. And yeah, we're definitely planning on making that a central part of the organization going forward to bring the word about gardening out to more people. But also, as people have said in different contexts, never let a tragedy go to waste, right? So that's kind of that too.
Well, Hans, we have a resource page that we try to post with most of our episodes. So if you give us the information, we'll post it up there.
Oh, I will definitely
and
do
who
that.
knows, maybe you can get some memberships that way. So we'd be happy to do that for you. I had a question too that's more, I don't know if it's global or what, but there's been, we're connecting you up with an episode that we're going to do on Black farmers. And the idea, you don't see too many young kids deciding that they can be farmers today, right? It's not something that's looked upon favorably in our society. So I'm wondering whether you see some avenue for your program to help expose kids to the idea that farming is a viable profession that one can get into, and beyond being viable, it's necessary. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are a couple of areas that touches on, and one is that in the matter of intergenerational wealth transfer, land is the most viable, sustainable vehicle for that. So young people have to think in terms of land from that perspective. It is, in fact, one of my major goals to get more young people involved in farming, and we have various collaborations and connections. I'm on the pilot community of something called the Black Farmer Fund, which is trying to extend resources to Black farmers in the Hudson Valley. And in that, I'm running into the Black farmers who are out in this world who are either making a go of it or who are trying to make a go of it. And that's going to be an avenue and a vehicle for us to then hopefully connect them with the children that we work with to say, look, show them the callaloo that you're growing, show them the CBD oil products that you're producing, show them about, what you need to do to keep chickens safe so they're laying eggs, right? And what the difference between organic feed or industrial produced meat and those kinds of products are versus something that's more humane. And so the deeper we get into those connections, the more we're going to roll that out as a central piece of what we're doing. And yeah, that's absolutely something that's incredibly important. And I also think too, with the recent legislation that will hopefully be enacted, they'll understand that it's financially viable. So there's the historical and cultural piece of, I'm not going to do that. I had ancestors that did that, and I don't want to be associated with that. So you have to get past that. But then there's also the very real barrier of how does one make a living doing it? So I'm hoping all the confluence of events will help us create a picture and a story that will allow them to see themselves making a living, connecting to the earth. And again, like I said, right, understanding that you don't have to be a high frequency trader on Wall Street or a venture fund, whatever those people do, a master of the universe. And in fact, you probably don't want to be in the future we're heading into. You need to figure out how to grow your own food. You need to figure out how to produce food for your community. You need to value community. And you need to figure out how to serve the common good instead of you're just yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I love it. I love it. Sounds great to me.
Well, you know, speaking of making a living, Hans, you guys need to make a living. You guys need to raise private funding. Okay, how do you do that? And if people want to contribute to your nonprofit program, how would they go about doing that?
We thank you for that. We have a form on the website that I think it's there at the top right of the page, if I'm visualizing correctly, that says donate. So that's the easiest way. We have a sign up form for people who want to get involved in other ways. And I hopefully my information will be in the show notes, and they can certainly get in touch with me to speak individually about other ways that they can connect. Because I got a lot of ideas, I got a lot of projects, and I only have like 40 or 50 more years, so I'm going to need help.
That's right. That's right.
40 or 50 on top of the 60.
That's
I
right.
like that.
On top of the 63.
Well, if you continue to eat well, then you'll make the 40 and 50, I'm sure, Hans.
I'm hoping, although right now, again, in terms of one of the lessons that we want to teach the kids and the young people I work with, in terms of extending our solidarity, we also work with some of the urban farm programs in New York City. And that connection between rural and urban is also incredibly important. And then on a racial basis, one of the things I've done, and maybe I'm a little too old for this, but I volunteered to patrol with something called the Main Street Patrol, which is a group of young Asians in Flushing, Queens, who are doing safety patrols to protect the older people in their community. And I've signed up to join those patrols. Again, I think one of the things I tried to teach these boys at the Secure Center was your life needs to be a lesson. And how you live it is a lesson. And it's, the dashes between when you were born and when you die, the dash is the thing that counts. And so I'm trying to live my dash out. And that's just another example of extending the lessons of what we're doing.
Right. And it's also hearkening back to the idea that we belong to community, right?
Yes,
and that
absolutely.
We have an obligation to do something beyond just satisfy our own individual needs. And so it's all good. And maybe it's the old heads that need to help the young ones learn what community is, because they've been raised in an environment where they don't have community, right? So that, right. Hans, that all sounds fascinating. We're gonna tell people, send Hans money so that he can do all these great projects that he wants to do. Any final words you want to leave with our audience?
No, I'd like people to pay attention to where their food comes from. And markets are crazy because farmers market food shouldn't cost the premium that it does compared to the overly processed food that found in supermarkets. So people should look for a way to get involved, because when consumer demand increases for naturally, locally grown food, then all of a sudden the prices kind of balance out. Look at composting initiatives that you can do in your own kitchen. If you're involved with kids, teach them an incredibly important survival skill, that is learning how to cook. If all those things, if you find one young person and teach them how to cook, or teach yourself how to cook and then teach that young person how to cook, we're going to be a long way ahead of where we are now.
Hans, this has all been really inspiring, and we're very fortunate to have had you on the show this time.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you both for the great questions and the opportunity. Thanks.
And one more time, where do people donate money if they can? One more time.
They need to go to landtolearn.org and look for that donate button.
There you go. All right, Hans, thank you, man.
Thank you.
So Hans gave us some great information about gardening at a local level. For the next episode, our guest will be Tracy Mccurdy, who's worked with the Black farmers in their quest to get justice from the United States Agricultural Department. And she'll be able to also talk about how the COVID relief bill is providing some help to the beleaguered Black farmers in the United States. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, visit our website, nubiantigerspodcast.com. In addition to the podcast, we also post a resource page for each subject to provide additional sources of information. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @NubianTigers, written as one word. We're also on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers podcast channel. Our podcast is hosted by Anchor.fm, but if you have a favorite podcast app, we're probably on it. Just look for Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.